No discharge in the war.
Infected.
Once you walk onto that mainland, there's no rescue. You know,
Look at what's in front of you.
There are many kinds of death.
Bullets in the bandoliers.
The rage virus is back, and 28 years after the outbreak, humanity is still fighting to survive. A dangerous journey into the infected mainland reveals terrifying secrets, brutal survivors, and horrors beyond imagination. Welcome to Filmy Review Hub. Let's break down 28 years later 2025 with its story, facts, and review for the 2026 sequel, See 28 Years Later. The Bone Temple, directed by Danny Boyle, written by Alex Garland, produced by Andrew MacDonald, Peter Rice, Bunny Bellew, Danny Boyle, and Alex Garland, starring Jodie Comer, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Jack O'Connell, Alfie Williams, and Ralph Fiennes. Cinematography, Anthony Dodd Mantle, edited by John Harris. Music by Young Fathers Production Companies, Columbia Pictures, Decibel Films, and DNA Films, distributed by Sony Pictures. Release dates June 19, 2025 in the United Kingdom and June 20, 2025 in the United States. Running time 115 minutes. Countries: United Kingdom and United States. Language: English. Budget: $60 million. Box office: $151.3 million. And 28 years later is a 2025 post-apocalyptic horror movie with a coming-of-age story at its heart. The movie is directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland. It is the third movie in the 28 Days Later film series and brings back the intense, terrifying world created by the earlier movies. The movie stars Jodie Comer, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Jack O'Connell, Alfie Williams, and Ralph Fiennes. The story follows a young boy who has grown up in a world that has been completely changed by the deadly infection. When his mother becomes seriously sick, he sets out on a dangerous mission to find medical help for her. The world he lives in is nothing like normal life. Years after the original outbreak, people are still trying to survive, and the infected remain a terrifying threat. The boy's journey takes him far away from the safety he knows and forces him to face dangers that could change his life forever. The movie also marks the return of Danny Boyle, writer Alex Garland, and cinematographer Anthony Dodd Mantle to the franchise. Boyle, who directed the original 28 Days Later, comes back to continue the story in a new chapter that takes place many years after the first outbreak. Cillian Murphy, who starred in the first movie, also returns to the franchise in a different role as an executive producer. His connection to the original film adds another layer of excitement for long fans of the series. 28 Years Later was filmed back-to-back with its sequel, 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. The sequel was directed by Nia Da Costa and was released in January 2026. This allowed the filmmakers to build the two movies as connected parts of the same larger story. The movie was released in theaters in the United Kingdom and the United States by Sony Pictures Releasing. It hit UK theaters on June 19, 2025, followed by its US theatrical release on June 20, 2025. Critics gave 28 years later generally positive reviews, praising its dark atmosphere, intense horror performances, and fresh approach to the franchise. The movie was made with a budget of around $60 million and earned approximately $151 million worldwide. Overall, 28 years later takes the terrifying world of the 28 Days Later franchise and jumps forward nearly 3 decades. Instead of simply repeating the old formula, the movie focuses on survival, family fear, and a young boy who is willing to risk everything to save his sick mother. The movie kicks off in the Scottish Highlands. A young boy named Jimmy, played by Rocco Haynes, is watching Teletubbies with his sisters when their mom suddenly rushes in, completely panicked. She tries to lock the kids inside the room to keep them safe, but people infected with the rage virus break into the house and start attacking everyone. Jimmy manages to escape the house, but sadly, his sisters don't make it out. He runs toward a nearby church where his father, a priest played by Sandy Bachelor, is getting ready for the infected to come after him. Before Jimmy hides, his father gives him a crucifix necklace and tells him to keep it with him. Moments later, a massive group of infected storms into the church and attacks the priest, infecting him just as he expected. Doc text on the screen explains what happened next. The rage virus completely destroyed the United Kingdom. The infection was pushed back before it could spread across mainland Europe, and the British Isles were placed under quarantine to keep the virus from spreading any farther. With the rest of the world cut off from them, the survivors left behind had no choice but to figure out how to stay alive on their own. 28 years later, a small community of survivors has built a village on Lindisfarne. A man named Jamie, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, is getting his young son Spike, played by Alfie Williams, ready for an important moment in his life. Spike is about to leave the village for the first time and hunt an infected using a bow and arrows. It's basically a coming of age ritual that proves he's ready to become a real survivor, but things aren't great at home. Spike's mother, Isla, played by Jodie Comer, is seriously sick and spends most of her time lying in bed. Jamie knows his wife is getting worse, but there's not much he can do to help her. The villagers cheer as Jamie and Spike leave through the gates. They head into the forest where they come across several huge overweight infected. Jamie and Spike take them down with their arrows. Jamie gets the first clean kill, hitting one of the infected right in the neck. They keep moving until they reach a house. Inside, they find an infected hanging upside down and tied up. The creature keeps struggling, making it hard for Spike to find the right moment to take the shot. Eventually, the infected breaks free, but Spike reacts quickly and puts an arrow straight into its head. Jamie and Spike continue toward the mainland. Along the way, Spike notices a fire burning in the distance. Jamie immediately tells him to stay away from that area and not ask too many questions. Soon, they run into a group of infected. But this isn't an ordinary group. They are being led by an especially strong and intelligent infected known as the Alpha. The Alpha and the other infected chase Jamie and Spike through the area. The two manage to take down several of them before hiding inside a house. They stay there until night falls. Once it gets dark, they make a run for home. Getting back isn't easy because the high tide has made the path extremely difficult to cross. The Alpha continues hunting them and gets dangerously close. Jamie finally reaches the village gates and warns the guards. The gatekeepers quickly fire a huge flaming arrow at the Alpha, hitting it directly in the chest. Jamie and Spike make it safely inside, and everyone celebrates their return. Spike is treated like a hero after completing his first hunt. Later, the villagers throw a party for Spike. During the celebration, Spike asks one of the village elders, Sam, played by Christopher Fulford, about the mysterious area on the mainland where he saw the fire. Sam tells him a disturbing story about Dr. Ian Kelson, played by Ralph Fiennes. According to Sam, Kelson is basically a crazy man who once arranged hundreds of dead bodies in a long line. Sam had seen the strange scene when he traveled to that part of the mainland with another survivor, but while the party is going on, Spike sees something that hurts him even more. He catches his father, Jamie, secretly leaving with another woman. Spike realizes that his father is having an affair, completely destroying the trust he had in him. The next morning, Spike confronts Jamie. He asks his father if he already knew about Dr. Kelson and whether he knew that the doctor might be able to help his mother. Spike also asks Jamie why he doesn't seem interested in finding a way to make Isla better. Jamie refuses to give him a proper answer, and the argument gets heated. Jamie finally loses his temper and slaps his son. Almost immediately, Jamie regrets what he did. But Spike is furious. He grabs a knife, points it at his father, and tells him to stay away from him and Isla. Spike then makes a huge decision. He takes his sick mother and leaves Lindisfarne. His plan is to travel to the mainland and find Dr. Kelson, hoping the doctor might somehow be able to save Isla. As they travel, Isla's condition gets worse. She sometimes becomes confused and doesn't even recognize Spike properly. She often calls him Dad, even though he's actually her son. At the same time, a group of NATO soldiers arrives on the mainland. They quickly find themselves surrounded by infected. The situation turns into complete chaos, and some of the soldiers are infected with the rage virus. Only 3 soldiers manage to survive and escape into a tunnel. But inside the tunnel, they run into a terrifying new alpha. This creature is incredibly powerful and violent. It grabs one of the soldiers and rips his head off, taking the spine with it. Meanwhile, Spike and Isla continue their dangerous journey. Another group of infected starts chasing them, forcing them to hide inside an abandoned gas station filled with dangerous fumes. The infected eventually break inside. Just when things look completely hopeless, a soldier named Eric, played by Edwin Riding, arrives and shoots the gas, setting the whole place on fire. The explosion wipes out the infected and gives Spike and Isla a chance to escape. Eric is frustrated because Spike can't help him find his missing soldiers, but the 3 of them decide to stick together for the time being. As they travel, they start getting to know each other. Eric tells Spike about the world outside the United Kingdom and what life is like beyond the quarantine. Eventually, they encounter another disturbing situation. Isla hears an infected woman screaming from inside a bus. When Isla looks inside, she realizes the woman is pregnant. Instead of running away, Isla tries to calm the infected woman down. Surprisingly, the woman seems to respond to her and even holds Isla's hand. The woman gives birth to a baby girl, but moments later she becomes violent again. Eric is forced to shoot her. Spike and Isla then discover something unbelievable. The newborn baby isn't infected with the rage virus. The baby appears to be completely healthy. However, Eric still believes the baby is too dangerous to leave alive and prepares to shoot her. Before he can do anything, the Alpha suddenly appears. It grabs Eric and brutally pulls him away, tearing his head and spine from his body. Spike and Isla run for their lives as the Alpha chases them. Just when they are about to be caught, Dr. Kelson appears and shoots the creature with a tranquilizer. Kelson has given the Alpha a name, Samson. He has also developed his own special toxin that can keep Samson calm and under control for a while. Kelson takes Spike and Isla to his strange home, which he calls the Bone Temple. It's basically a giant shrine dedicated to the dead, a dark reminder that everyone eventually dies. Kelson has collected hundreds of human skulls and stacked them into a massive tower. He takes Eric's head and burns away the remaining flesh so he can add the skull to his collection. It's creepy, disturbing, and shows just how obsessed Kelson has become with death. Kelson then examines the baby and discovers something incredible. He believes the baby was protected from the rage virus because her mother's placenta kept the infection from reaching her. But Kelson also examines Isla and delivers heartbreaking news. She has terminal cancer and there is nothing he can do to save her. Spike is completely crushed. He came all this way hoping to find a cure for his mom, only to discover that she is dying from cancer. Isla, however, accepts what is happening. Instead of falling apart, she comforts Spike and tries to help him understand that she knows her time is almost over. Kelson eventually puts Spike to sleep. While Spike is unconscious, Isla joins Kelson so he can give her a mercy killing and end her suffering. When Spike wakes up, Kelson gives him his mother's skull. Spike is devastated but knows he has to say goodbye. He climbs all the way to the top of the enormous skull tower and places Isla's skull there, giving her a final resting place among the countless people who died before her. The next day, Spike and Kelson have another terrifying encounter with Samson. They try to escape the powerful Alpha and eventually jump into a pit. Samson grabs Kelson and starts strangling him. Spike quickly reacts and uses one of Kelson's morphine darts to knock Samson out again. After surviving the attack, Spike and Kelson decide to go their separate ways. Spike takes the newborn baby with him. He names the little girl Isla after his mother. He returns to Lindisfarne and leaves the baby with a note for Jamie and the other villagers. The message explains that the baby is clean and hasn't been infected with the rage virus. Spike wants the village to protect her and give her a chance to grow up. Jamie desperately runs toward the river, hoping to find Spike and bring his son home. But the tide is already high and Spike is nowhere to be found. 28 days later, Spike is living on his own and eating a fish he caught when he suddenly gets discovered by a group of infected. He manages to kill one of them, but several more begin chasing him. Spike runs as fast as he can, but eventually reaches a dead end. Just when it looks like he's completely screwed, a mysterious blonde man suddenly appears. The stranger is surrounded by a group of followers who all look strangely similar. Instead of being afraid of the infected, they move like a highly trained group and perform crazy acrobatic stunts while taking the creatures down. The mysterious man offers Spike help and Spike quickly accepts. After the infected are wiped out, the man finally introduces himself. His name is Jimmy. And this is a huge reveal. He is the same Jimmy we saw at the very beginning of the movie, the little boy who escaped the infected attack in the Scottish Highlands 28 years earlier. Jimmy is still wearing the crucifix necklace his father gave him when he was a child. He looks at Spike and tells him that they should become friends, setting up a mysterious new chapter in Spike's story. Casting Aaron Taylor Johnson as Jamie, Aaron Taylor Johnson steps into the role of Jamie, the seasoned scavenger and father living on the tidal island of Lindisfarne in a Britain still locked under quarantine nearly 3 decades after the rage virus outbreak. Jamie functions as both provider and flawed mentor, guiding his 12-year-old son Spike through a coming-of-age hunting ritual on the mainland while concealing personal failings that fracture the family's trust. His character embodies the hardened practicality of island life, scavenging runs, defense against evolved infected, and the rigid rules of a community that treats the mainland as forbidden territory except under strict conditions. Taylor Johnson brings a physical intensity and simmering internal conflict that suit a man who has found purpose in control yet struggles when his carefully maintained authority is questioned. Taylor Johnson's career trajectory prepared him for this blend of action, emotional restraint, and moral ambiguity. Early breakout work as the title character in Kick-Ass established his ability to balance youthful energy with darker undertones. Subsequent roles expanded that range, the conflicted and ultimately tragic Quicksilver in Avengers, Age of Ultron, the complex and troubled young man in Nocturnal Animals, and the high-octane ensemble player in Bullet Train. He has repeatedly demonstrated a capacity for characters who project competence and charisma while harboring private fractures. In 28 years later, that quality serves Jamie's dual presentation as a capable hunter who can train his son in survival skills and as a husband whose affair and reluctance to seek outside medical help for his ailing wife reveal deeper denial. The performance requires conveying both protective instinct and the quiet erosion of honesty within a closed community. Casting Taylor Johnson also anchors the film's generational focus. Jamie is not a lone survivor in the mold of earlier franchise protagonists. He is a father whose decisions shape the next generation's understanding of the world. The actor's established screen presence allows the film to treat Jamie as a known quantity within the island's hierarchy while still revealing new layers through Spike's perspective. Physical demands of the role, running across the causeway, engaging infected, navigating collapsing structures, align with Taylor Johnson's history of action-oriented work, while quieter domestic scenes demand the restraint he has shown in more dramatic turns. The result is a portrayal that feels lived in rather than archetypal, grounding the larger world building of a quarantined Britain in one family's daily realities. Alfie Williams, as Spike Alfie Williams, a relative newcomer, carries the native white as Spike, the 12-year-old son of Jamie and Isla, and the film's primary point of view. Spike's arc moves from ceremonial first kill on the mainland to a self-directed journey seeking medical help for his mother, forcing him to confront both the physical threats of evolved infected and the moral complexities of the adult world. The character's youth is central. He is old enough to participate in survival rituals, yet still processing the gap between the stories adults tell and the realities he observes. Williams's performance must balance vulnerability with growing agency, particularly in sequences where Spike acts independently of parental authority. Williams' casting as a breakout lead underscores the film's commitment to a fresh generational lens. Prior to 28 years later, his screen work was limited, making the role a significant debut. The character demands technical proficiency with practical skills, archery, stealth, navigation of hazardous terrain, alongside the emotional range required for scenes of discovery, betrayal, grief, and resolve. Spike's decision to leave the relative safety of Lindisfarne with his mother and later to return an uninfected infant while continuing alone on the mainland places the young actor at the center of the film's exploration of inherited trauma and chosen responsibility. The performance must convey a child who has absorbed the community's myths about the mainland and the doctor living there, then tests those myths against direct experience. The choice of a young, relatively unknown actor also serves the film's thematic interest in how knowledge and culture are transmitted across isolation. Spike's journey is less about mastering violence and more about deciding what kind of future he will claim. Williams's naturalism allows the audience to experience the mainland's wonders and horrors through unfiltered eyes, heightening the contrast with the island's controlled narratives. Supporting moments, observing foreign quarantine patrols, witnessing an alpha's intelligence, navigating the Bone Temple, really on the actor's ability to register awe, fear, and determination without overplaying. In a franchise previously defined by adult survivors, centering a child protagonist marks a deliberate shift, and Williams' casting is integral to making that shift credible. Asterisk. Jodie Comer as Isla. Jodie Comer portrays Isla, Jamie's wife and Spike's mother, whose progressive illness drives the central journey. Isla's condition manifests in cognitive disruption and physical decline. What the family initially treats as a mysterious ailment is later identified as advanced terminal cancer. The role requires conveying both residual maternal strength and the gradual erosion of self, culminating in a conscious choice about the end of her life. Kamar's calmer performance must sustain audience investment in a character whose agency is constrained by illness, yet remains decisive in key moments. Kamar's established range made her a natural fit. Her Emmy-winning work as Villanelle in Killing Eve demonstrated an ability to inhabit characters of sharp intelligence and emotional complexity, while subsequent roles expanded into more grounded dramatic territory. In 28 years later, she channels that precision into a quieter register, a woman whose lucidity comes and goes, whose love for her son remains constant, and whose final decisions reshape Spike's understanding of care and loss. The illness is not merely a plot device. It forces the family to confront the limits of island isolation and the risks of seeking help beyond the causeway. Kamar's ability to suggest both vulnerability and residual authority allows Isla to function as more than a catalyst. Casting an actress of Kamar's profile also elevates the domestic stakes. Isla is not a peripheral figure. Her condition is the reason Spike risks everything. Scenes of mother and son on the mainland, encounters with infected, the birth of an uninfected infant from a pregnant infected woman, arrival at the Bone Temple require Kama to convey physical frailty alongside emotional clarity. The performance's restraint ensures that Isla's arc feels earned rather than sentimental. Her presence grounds the film's exploration of love as both sustaining force and source of painful choice, aligning with the Doctor's later invocation of memento amoris. Asterisk. Ralph Fiennes as Dr. Ian Kelson. Ralph Fiennes brings gravitas and ambiguity to Dr. Ian Kelson, the former general practitioner living in exile on the mainland and constructing the Bone Temple, an ossuary of cleaned bones from both survivors and infected. Kelson operates outside the island community's rules, practicing a form of ritualized remembrance while retaining medical knowledge that proves decisive for Isla's diagnosis. The character exists at the intersection of science, ritual, and possible madness. Island rumor paints him as unstable. Yet, Spike and Isla encounter a man of deliberate philosophy. Fiennes' career has long included figures of moral complexity and intellectual intensity. From Schindler's List to the Grand Budapest Hotel to his work in the Harry Potter series, he has specialized in characters whose surface authority conceals deeper currents. In 28 years later, that quality serves Kelson's dual function as diagnostician and keeper of the dead. The Bone Temple itself is both memorial and memento mori. Kelson's explanation of the concept and his later shift to memento amoris positions him as a figure who has processed mass death into a personal cosmology. Fiennes' precise diction and physical stillness make the character's eccentricities feel purposeful rather than theatrical. The casting of an actor of Fiennes' stature also signals the film's interest in adult authority figures who operate beyond conventional community structures. Kelson's examination of Isla, his euthanasia of her at her request, and his handing of her skull to Spike for placement atop the temple form the emotional core of the mainland journey. The performance must balance clinical detachment with genuine care, allowing the audience to accept both the horror of the diagnosis and the mercy of the chosen end. Fiennes' presence elevates the sequence from plot necessity to philosophical set piece, reinforcing the film's themes of memory, love, and the rituals humans create to metabolize catastrophe. Jack O'Connell as Sir Lord Jimmy Crystal. Jack O'Connell appears as the adult Sir Lord Jimmy Crystal, leader of a cult-like group of survivors known as the Jimmies, violent figures in colored tracksuits and peroxide blonde wigs who operate on the mainland. The character bookends the film. A child version played by Rocco Haynes survives the initial outbreak in the Scottish Highlands, and the adult Jimmy reappears in the final sequence to rescue Spike from a pack of infected, inviting him into the group. The role requires conveying both residual trauma from the outbreak and the charismatic, unsettling authority of a self-fashioned cult leader. O'Connell's prior work has frequently explored young men shaped by violence and institutional failure. Skin Startup 71 and more recent projects such as Sinners. That history suits a character who has survived the rage virus's early chaos and reconstructed identity around a shared mythologized name. The Jimmy's aesthetic, tracksuits, wigs, collective naming suggest a deliberate rejection of pre-outbreak norms and an embrace of a new tribalism. O'Connell's ability to project both menace and warped camaraderie makes the final invitation to Spike feel simultaneously like rescue and potential new danger. Casting O'Connell also sets up continuity for the planned sequel. The character's expanded role in subsequent films is already signaled by the dual casting of child and adult versions and by the detailed ensemble of named Jimmies surrounding him. The performance must establish enough presence in limited screen time to justify that future weight. O'Connell's physicality and vocal intensity allow Jimmy Crystal to function as both endpoint of Spike's current journey and gateway to a different mode of mainland survival. Stu Lewis Perry as Samson. Stu Lewis Perry portrays Samson, a physically imposing alpha, an evolved form of the infected that is stronger, more intelligent, and capable of leading packs. Samson appears as a recurring threat during Jamie and Spike's hunting trip and later during Spike and Isla's mainland journey, culminating in a confrontation at the Bone Temple where Kelson's tranquilizer darts temporarily subdue him. The role demands extreme physical presence and a performance that conveys animalistic rage tempered by residual strategy. Lewis Perry's background as a former MMA fighter and his imposing stature, reported around 6'8", made him a natural choice for an alpha. Accounts of his audition describe a deliberate attempt to terrify director Danny Boyle by sprinting across a large room, an approach that secured the role. The character is not a mindless infected. Alphas represent the virus's evolution over 28 years, requiring the actor to suggest intelligence within the rage-driven ferocity. Lewis Perry's physical commitment, sprinting, climbing, sustained aggression anchors the film's updated threat level. The casting also reflects a production interest in practical, intimidating presence over purely digital effects. Samson's encounters with the human characters generate some of the film's most visceral tension, and Lewis Perry's size and movement vocabulary make those sequences land with impact. The character's temporary sedation and later rampage at the temple further allow the actor to modulate intensity, showing the alpha as both force of nature and subject to chemical control. Edwin Riding as Eric Sundqvist. Edwin Riding plays Eric Sundqvist, a Swedish amphibious corps soldier and sole survivor of a shipwrecked NATO quarantine patrol boat. Eric briefly allies with Spike and Isla, helping them against infected before the situation deteriorates around the birth of an uninfected infant from a pregnant infected woman. His presence introduces an outside perspective, continental Europe's containment of the virus versus Britain's permanent quarantine, and ends violently when an alpha intervenes, Riding, known for work in Swedish productions and emerging international projects, brings a grounded military pragmatism that contrasts with the islanders' more insular survival strategies. The character's willingness to kill the newborn to eliminate perceived risk highlights the ethical fractures between different survivor groups. Riding's performance must convey competence under pressure and the rapid shift from ally to threat when priorities diverge. The casting of a non-British actor reinforces the film's geographic and cultural isolation themes. Britain remains sealed off, and contact with outsiders is rare and fraught. Christopher Fulford as Sam and Stella Gonnet as Jenny. Christopher Fulford appears as Sam, a friend of Jamie's and resident of the island community who provides Spike with information about the mainland fire and the rumor of Dr. Kelson. Sam functions as a secondary adult voice, offering alternative interpretations of the world beyond the causeway. Fulford's extensive character actor experience in British television and film lends credibility to a role that is primarily conversational yet pivotal in advancing Spike's decision to leave. Stella Gonnet plays Jenny, a member of the island's leadership council. Her presence helps establish the community's hierarchical structure and the collective enforcement of quarantine rules. Gonnet's background in British stage and screen work suits a figure of quiet institutional authority. Together, Fulford and Gonnet populate the island with recognizable adult types, confidant and council member, against which Spike's rebellion gains sharper definition. Supporting ensemble. The Jimmies and island residents, the film's supporting cast, densely populates both the island and the mainland cult. Aaron Kellyman appears as Jimmy Inc., part of the adult Jimmy Crystal's group. Additional named Jimmies include Robert Rhodes as Jimmy, Sam Locke as Jimmy Fox, Maura Bird as Jimmy Jones, Ghazi Al-Rufa as Jimmy Snake, Emma Laird as Jimmy Ma, and Connor Newell as Jimmy Shite. Rocco Haynes plays the young Jimmy Crystal in the prologue. These performers create a collective identity for the cult, shared aesthetic, shared naming convention that feels both theatrical and menacing. Islandside supporting players include Kim Allen and Sandy Batchelor as Jimmy's mother and father in the prologue, Jeffrey Newland as Anthony, Joe Blakemore as Dave, Amy Cameron as Rosie, the school teacher involved with Jamie, and a range of villagers and infected performers. Silly Crossland appears as the pregnant infected, whose uninfected newborn becomes a key plot element. The depth of the ensemble underscores the film's interest in community as both protective structure and source of limiting mythology. Asterisk casting process and production context. Its casting for 28 years later prioritized a mix of established stars capable of carrying emotional and physical demands and relative newcomers who could embody generational shift. Aaron Taylor Johnson, Jodie Comer, and Ralph Fiennes were announced in April 2024, with Jack O'Connell joining the following month. Aaron Kellyman was cast in June 2024. The decision to center a young unknown as Spike reflects a deliberate narrative choice to view the post-rage world through eyes still forming their understanding of it. Cillian Murphy, star of the original 28 Days Later, served as executive producer but does not appear on screen in this installment, preserving the film's focus on a new family unit while maintaining franchise continuity at the production level. Director Danny Boyle and writer Alex Garland's return to the series after more than 2 decades shaped casting expectations. The original 28 Days Later relied on relative unknowns and emerging talents. The new film balances that spirit with the star power needed for a major studio release. Practical considerations, extensive location work in Northumberland, physical sequences involving infected and alphas, and the use of iPhone 15 Pro Max cameras alongside other formats favored actors comfortable with intense location-driven shoots. G. Lewis Parry's audition anecdote illustrates the premium placed on visceral presence for the infected hierarchy. The ensemble's composition also serves thematic ends. The island community is populated largely by British actors, reinforcing the sense of a sealed national remnant. The brief appearance of a Swedish NATO sailor and the evolved infected, including the Alpha Samson, introduce external and biological pressures that the island's isolation cannot fully contain. The Jimmy's cult, with its deliberate stylistic uniformity, suggests alternative social formations that have emerged in the absence of centralized authority. Casting choices thus map onto the film's interest in how societies reconstruct themselves under prolonged quarantine. Character dynamics and performance interplay, the core family unit, Jamie, Isla, and Spike, depends on the interplay among Taylor Johnson, Kammer, and Williams. Taylor Johnson's Jamie projects competence that gradually reveals cracks. Kammer's Isla maintains emotional centrality even as her condition worsens. Williams's Spike absorbs and then rejects the partial truths offered by both parents. Scenes of the hunting ritual, the discovery of Jamie's affair, and the mainland escape derive tension from these shifting alliances. Fiennes' Kelson enters as an external adult authority whose medical knowledge and philosophical framing force Spike to confront mortality directly. O'Connell's Jimmy Crystal closes the circle by offering a different model of mainland survival, one rooted in collective identity rather than nuclear family or solitary ritual. Supporting performances flesh out the social textures. The Island Council and scavengers establish the rules Spike ultimately breaks. The Jimmies demonstrate that survival can take forms far removed from Lindisfarne's relative order. Infected performers, particularly Lewis Parry as Samson, keep the physical threat immediate and evolving. The result is a casting ensemble that supports both intimate family drama and larger-scale world building. Physical and technical demands. Many roles required significant physical preparation. Taylor Johnson and Williams trained for hunting sequences, archery, and pursuit across difficult terrain. Lewis Parry's Alpha demanded sustained high-intensity movement and the ability to convey intelligence within rage-driven behavior. Kammer's portrayal of progressive illness required careful modulation of physical and cognitive decline. Fiennes' Kelson, while less action-oriented, involved working within the elaborate bone temple set and handling practical effects related to bones and ritual. The production's mix of practical stunts, location shooting, and selective visual effects placed a premium on actors who could deliver consistent performances under demanding conditions. Asterisk franchise continuity and generational shift by casting a new family at the center and limiting returning franchise faces to production roles 28 years later signals a generational handoff. The original film survivors are largely absent. Instead, the story examines how their world has calcified into myth and rule for those born after the outbreak. Williams's Spike embodies that post-outbreak generation. Taylor Johnson and Kammer represent adults who remember enough of the before times to shape their children's understanding, yet remain constrained by trauma and habit. Fiennes' Kelson offers a third model, an adult who has turned mass death into deliberate ritual. O'Connell's Jimmy Crystal suggests yet another path, tribal reinvention. The casting architecture therefore mirrors the film's thematic architecture. Multiple ways of living with the aftermath, none of them complete or final, supporting roles and world texture. Beyond the principles, the dense supporting cast creates texture. Prologue performers establish the personal cost of the original outbreak through the young Jimmy's family. Island residents provide the social pressure against which Spike rebels. Mainland figures the pregnant infected, the NATO sailor, the various infected types, slow lows, berserkers, expand the biological and human ecology of the quarantined zone. Each small role contributes to the sense of a world that continues to operate according to its own brutal logics even when the camera is focused elsewhere. The cumulative effect of the casting is a film that feels populated rather than sparsely staged. Lindisfarne is a functioning, if rigid, community. The mainland is a landscape of competing survival strategies and evolving threats. The actors collectively make both spaces feel inhabited and consequential. Performance style and directorial approach Boyle's direction, returning to the series with cinematographer Anthony Dodd Mantle, favors kinetic energy and close observation. Casting choices support that style. Actors capable of both explosive physical work and quiet observable interiority. Wide frame compositions demand performers who can hold attention across the frame. Intimate scenes require micro expressions that register under pressure. The ensemble meets those requirements across age ranges and experience levels. Asterisk legacy and sequel positioning. Several casting decisions explicitly position the film within a larger planned trilogy. O'Connell's Jimmy Crystal and the surrounding Jimmys are set up for expanded roles. Williams's Spike leaves the island with unresolved questions and an open future. Fiennes' Kelson and the Bone Temple remain available as ongoing elements. Louis Parry's Samson survives multiple confrontations. The casting therefore functions not only for the immediate story but as infrastructure for subsequent chapters. The full ensemble, leads, supporting players, and specialized infected performers creates a coherent social and biological ecosystem. From the island's scavengers and council members to the mainland's cultists, doctor and alphas, every significant presence is embodied by an actor whose prior work or physical qualities align with the demands of the role. The result is a casting achievement that serves both the intimate coming-of-age story and the broader portrait of a nation still living in the long shadow of the rage virus. Development and pre-production. The road to 28 years later stretched across nearly 2 decades of false starts. Talk of a third entry in the franchise surfaced as early as June 2007 when ACIT index equals 1. Fox Atomic confirmed it was developing a third installment contingent on how well 28 weeks later performed on home video site. The following month, director Danny Boyle indicated that the broad strokes of a third story already existed. Momentum, however, did not translate into a green light. By 2010, screenwriter Alex Garland pointed to unresolved rights issues as the reason the project had stalled, and over the next several years, the film drifted in and out of active development. Boyle remained cautiously optimistic through 2011, but admitted by 2013 that he wasn't sure the movie would ever come together. A more concrete sign of life emerged in January 2015 when Garland acknowledged the project had landed in development hell, but said serious conversations were happening behind the scenes. At that point, the working title was 28 months later, and Garland had already produced a spec script under that name. That draft imagined a world in which the rage virus had been deliberately weaponized by a military force, sending a team of Chinese Special Forces soldiers back to the original lab where the virus had been created in search of a cure, with the film intended to play out largely in subtitled Mandarin Chinese. Boyle ultimately passed on the script, feeling that a weaponized virus premise had become a tired horror convention, invoking the Alien franchise as an example of a series that had leaned on the same trope one too many times. Once that version was shelved, Garland decided to push the next attempt in a stranger and more idiosyncratic direction. He later credited the video game The Last of Us as a significant influence on the tone he was chasing for the eventual story. Interest resurfaced periodically over the following years. Boyle reaffirmed in mid-2019 that he and Garland were actively working on a new installment. Cast members from the earlier films began signaling their willingness to return. Imogen Poots, who appeared in 28 Weeks Later, expressed enthusiasm about reprising her role in early 2020, and Cillian Murphy, the lead of the original 2002 film, did the same in 2021. By November 2022, Boyle, Garland, and Murphy were all publicly on record as being interested in moving forward with the sequel, and by June 2023, Boyle and Garland described their intentions in firmer terms, saying they wanted to pursue production seriously and diligently. It was at this stage that the project's title changed to 28 Years Later, a nod to how long the film had taken to reach the screen. Boyle said he was prepared to direct it himself, though he left open the possibility that Garland might take the reins instead. Murphy, for his part, said he'd recently spoken with Boyle about the film and remained interested in returning if both Boyle and Garland were attached in their creative capacities. The project was formally announced as being in active development in January 2024, this time framed not as a standalone sequel but as the opening chapter of an entirely new trilogy. Boyle would direct the first film, with Garland writing scripts for all three. Boyle, Garland, producer Andrew MacDonald, and executive Peter Rice would produce. That same period saw a significant behind the scenes shift. The distribution rights to the original 28 Days Later reverted to MacDonald from Searchlight Pictures, and MacDonald subsequently sold those rights along with rights to the new films to Sony Pictures. Rights to the middle film 28 weeks later remained separately held by 20th Century Studios. In March 2024, Garland confirmed he was writing all three chapters of the planned trilogy, and the following month he cited the 1969 British drama Cass as a major touchstone for the material. Murphy was formally announced as an executive producer that same month. The film moved forward under Columbia Pictures and DNA Films, with additional financing from TSG Entertainment. Casting fell into place through the spring of 2024. Aaron Taylor Johnson, Jodie Comer, and Ralph Fiennes joined the project in April, followed by Jack O'Connell in May. For a stretch, reports suggested Murphy would appear on-screen reprising his role as Jim, but producer Andrew MacDonald clarified in January 2025 that Murphy would not actually appear in the film, despite staying on as an executive producer. Erin Kellyman rounded out the principal cast additions in June 2024. Filming principal photography began on the 7th of May 2024 in Northumberland, in the north of England, with Anthony Dodmantle, a veteran collaborator of Boyle's, serving as cinematographer. The shoot wrapped a little under 3 months later on the 29th July 2024. The production's most talked about technical choice was its camera package. The bulk of the film was captured on Apple iPhone 15 Pro Max handsets, supplemented by action cameras, drones, and a mix of other digital and traditional film cameras. The decision echoed the shooting method Boyle used on the original 28 Days Later more than 2 decades earlier, when the crew relied on a compact Canon XL1 digital camcorder specifically because its small footprint let them film in empty real-world London locations within tight windows granted by local authorities. The new film pursued a similar logic with even more portable tools. Visually, the production settled on an unusually wide 2.76 or 1 aspect ratio, evoking the look of vintage Ultra Panavision 70 productions. Boyle and his team chose that ratio deliberately to heighten tension, reasoning that a wider frame would force audiences to keep scanning the edges of the image, never quite sure where the next infected figure might appear. Much of the footage was captured at 4K resolution and frame rates up to 60 frames per second, and in certain sequences the actors operated cameras themselves. Some of the film's more kinetic sequences used a bullet time effect achieved with a custom rig holding anywhere from 8 to 20 iPhones arranged in a circle, a setup that let the crew capture a single moment from many angles simultaneously and gave Boyle considerably more flexibility once the footage reached the editing room. Boyle explained that shooting on phones let the crew work with a fraction of the usual equipment, making it far easier to move through Northumberland's rural terrain while limiting the production's physical footprint on the landscape. The trade-off was that the iPhone's stock camera software tended to autofocus on whatever was brightest or most visually prominent in a shot rather than whatever the director actually wanted emphasized, which meant the crew regularly had to manually override the automatic focus to get the compositions Boyle was after. Filming was concentrated in the north of England, spanning the northeast and Yorkshire and the Humber regions. Locations included the tidal island of Lindisfarne off the Northumberland coast, along with Hexham, Bellingham, Kielder Forest, Rothbury, Newcastle upon Tyne, Waskerley in County Durham, Melsonby, Ripon, Fountains Abbey, Aysgarth Falls, and Redmire in North Yorkshire, plus Bradford in West Yorkshire. Additional scenes were shot at Planky Mill Farm near Langley and Barden Mill in Northumberland, and the production also travelled south to film at Cheddar Gorge in Somerset. One especially notable piece of location work involved the Sycamore Gap tree, a landmark that had been illegally felled by vandals in 2023. The production digitally recreated the tree for the film. Since the story's alternate timeline assumes that act of vandalism never happened, the film's depiction of the infected also drew attention during and after production. The infected characters appear nude on screen, and Boyle has said that the performers playing them were legally required to wear prosthetic genital coverings because a child actor, Alfie Williams, was present on set during filming. Post-production editing and visual effects work proceeded through late 2024 and into 2025 alongside the marketing rollout, with the multi-angle footage captured on the iPhone rig giving Boyle extensive coverage to work with in the cutting room. One especially prominent post-production element combined archival British wartime footage with clips from the 1944 film adaptation of Henry V, set to a 1915 spoken word recording of Rudyard Kipling's 1903 poem Boots, performed by American actor Taylor Holmes. The sequence was built to dramatize how the isolated island community in the story reconstructs its own cultural mythology out of half-remembered, distorted fragments of Britain's past, turning historical touchstones like the Battle of Agincourt or the Blitz into something closer to folklore than history. Music for the score. The production turned to the Scottish group Young Fathers, whose involvement was confirmed in May 2025. They took over scoring duties from John Murphy, who had composed the propulsive, now iconic score for the original 28 Days Later. The soundtrack was released through Milan Records on the 28th June 2025, the same day as the film's wide release. Theatrical 28 years later had its first public unveiling a day ahead of its wide opening, with a special preview screening on the 19th of June 2025 at the Tyneside Cinema in Newcastle upon Tyne. The screening was attended by Boyle himself and by Alfie Williams, a local actor from the area, along with a large number of crew members, service providers and background performers who had been part of the Northumberland shoot. The film then opened wide in the United Kingdom, the United States and Canada the next day, the 20th June 2025, distributed by Sony Pictures, releasing under its Columbia Pictures banner. Marketing for the film generated significant buzz well before release. The first trailer dropped on the 10th December 2024 and made heavy use of the same Taylor Holmes recording of Boots that would later resurface in the finished film's montage sequence. The trailer became the top trending video on YouTube and had surpassed 10 million views within 48 hours. Critic Stuart Heritage, writing for The Guardian, singled out the use of the old Kipling recording, calling the trailer alone one of the most exciting pieces of marketing tied to any 2025 release. The trailer's viral reception had a tangible knock-on effect. Sony decided to release the original 28 Days Later on digital platforms for the first time on the 18th December 2024, capitalizing on the renewed interest. Home media following its theatrical run 28 years later arrived on digital platforms through Sony Pictures Home Entertainment on the 29th July 2025. A physical release followed roughly 2 months later, with the film reaching 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray, Standard Blu-ray, and DVD formats on the 23 September 2025. Reception box office 28 years later grossed $70.4 million across the United States and Canada and an additional $80.9 million in international markets for a worldwide total of $151. $3 million against a reported $60 million production budget. Going into its opening weekend, the film was released alongside Pixar's Elio and was projected to open somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million domestically from roughly 444 theaters, with some more bullish estimates reaching as high as $45 million. It earned $14 million on its first day of release, which included $5.8 million from Thursday preview screenings. By the end of the weekend, it had settled at a $30 million domestic debut, landing in second place behind the holdover animated hit How to Train Your Dragon. That opening nonetheless marked the strongest weekend debut in the history of the 28 Days Later franchise, surpassing both prior films in the series. Critical reaction to 28 Years Later skewed positive overall. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film held an 88% approval rating from 398 critics, with an average score of 7.4 out of 10. The site's consensus summary praised the film for channeling contemporary anxiety with the intensity of the rage virus itself, calling it a haunting, visceral ride that subverted expectations. On Metacritic, which calculates a weighted average, the film scored 77 out of 100 based on 56 critics, translating to a generally favorable rating. Audience response was more measured. Those surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B. and just 52% of post-track respondents said they would definitely recommend it to others, figures that suggest a gap between critical enthusiasm and mainstream audience reaction. Several reviewers were especially effusive. Robbie Collin of the Daily Telegraph awarded the film a full 5 out of 5 stars, describing it as an unusual hybrid of the wartime pastoral drama A Canterbury Tale and the notorious exploitation film Cannibal Holocaust. Ed Potton of the Times also gave it 5 stars, calling it astonishing and noting that its feverish, sweaty intensity wouldn't work for every viewer, while still praising Boyle and Garland for the creative risks they took. Robert Daniels, reviewing for RogerEbert.com, awarded 3.5 out of 4 stars, framing the film as a rare surprise in an era dominated by predictable franchise filmmaking, and describing it as a tonally daring, unexpectedly tender coming-of-age story wrapped inside a zombie film, one whose earnestness felt off-putting at first before ultimately winning him over. Later that year, Daniels' Roger Ebert colleague Scout Tafoya named 28 Years Later the third best film of 2025 on his personal year-end list, behind Two Pianos, tied with Film Lovers and The Ice Tower. Other critics were more mixed or measured in their praise. Clarice Loffrey of The Independent described the film as a distinctly post-Brexit, COVID-conscious take on the zombie genre and picked up on its themes of nationalism and isolationism, but ultimately rated it a more modest 3 out of 5 stars. David Fear of Rolling Stone questioned whether the film entirely came together as a satisfying whole. Though he credited it with making the most of its timely thematic material, a handful of reviews were outright negative. Adam Graham of the Detroit News gave the film a D grade, describing it as an uneven mixture of gnarly horror movie violence and melancholic human drama that never settled into a consistent tone, warning that it might leave some viewers reeling from tonal whiplash. Kyle Smith of the Wall Street Journal was similarly unimpressed, panning the film as short on both wit and narrative coherence. Beyond individual reviews, much of the critical conversation around 28 years later focused on its underlying themes. Boyle and Garland have both spoken about the film as an exploration of British isolationism and cultural decline, framing its quarantine cut-off vision of Britain as a reflection of a broader national mood shaped by Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic. Critics picked up on how the film's isolated island community represents a kind of regression away from progressive, forward-looking values and toward a comforting but distorted nostalgia for an imagined past, a dynamic made explicit in the film's wartime footage montage, which shows how stories like the Battle of Agincourt or the Blitz can curdle into half-remembered myth once they're passed down enough times. Several observers also noted how the characters' growing willingness to take dangerous risks as the story progresses mirrors the way public caution around COVID-19 eroded over time, even as the underlying risks hadn't necessarily gone away. Reviews number 128 Years Later 2025 overview posters, upload poster, 28 Years Later 2025 Thai movie poster, copyright by respective movie studios. Intended for personal use only and strictly forbidden to reproduce as printed posters. Report incorrect information. Additional images. 1AO80 1AO ADO 1 in 20 PX. Only donors and contributors can download this HD poster. Movie poster. Original movie posters and memorabilia. Amazon buy official Blu-rays, DVDs and movie memorabilia. eBay search for copies of this movie poster on eBay. Art of the Movies 100% authentic original movie posters. Number 228 Years Later English movie overview videos. A group of survivors of the rage virus lives on a small island. When one of the group leaves the island on a mission into the mainland, he discovers secrets, wonders, and horrors that have mutated not only the infected but other survivors. Total reviews 0, another zombie movie. Because of zombies, the normal men live in an island and show more. Director Danny Boyle, producers Danny Boyle, Alex Garland, Andrew McDonald, Peter Rice, Bernie Bello Production Company, Columbia Pictures Music Director, Hildur Gunnadottir Cinematographer, Anthony Mantle Editor, John Harris Original Story Writer, Alex Garland. Number 3 from Rage to Regret, how 28 years later lost its bite. 28 years later is plagued by more than the infected. Director Danny Boyle potentially had a next level horror film on his hands with 28 years later, 2025. He had it. It peeks through in specific scenes and precisely captured moments like a Terrence Malick film at some points, and then it is dropped, easing back onto a bumpy narrative road filled with plot holes and inconsistencies. 28 Years Later is a deeply flawed film, unequal in script quality to 28 Days Later or 28 Weeks Later. This film is a waste of potential, a waste of acting talent, and a waste of directing prowess. This film, whatever it truly is, does not deserve the moniker 28 as it bears only a tangential connection to its predecessors. This film does not expand and carry on the original storyline as did 28 Weeks Later. This film feels like a standalone post-apocalyptic film in need of more script revision and polishing. Signs of trouble. The second scene in 28 Years Later in the church and how it is resolved is an earlier indication of storytelling trouble for the film. It's a strange and off-kilter resolution. Extremists can drive a normal person mad, but the situation with the priest is utterly baffling considering that there is a house full of children that possibly needs his help and protection a short distance away, a house containing his wife and son. This is the first major conceit the film asks the viewer to accept, and it isn't the last. By the end of 28 years later, its ridiculous contradictions and plot points bewilder the viewer, causing them to ruminate on what could have been if someone who is capable of maintaining tonal consistency and imbuing characters with rationality had written this film. 28 years later, 2025, movie trailer. The Rage virus returns in Danny Boyle's horrifying zombie sequel January 5, 2025. Film review 28 years later, 2025. Danny Boyle's exciting science fiction thriller surprises with several intriguing plot developments June 19, 2025. The gas station flame out. The gas station scene is the point in 28 years later where all pretense of realism leaves the film and never returns. Exploding the fumes in the gas station would indiscriminately kill everyone, infected and uninfected alike. Being a good person doesn't and shouldn't protect you from the flames, except in this film. In 28 years later, only the bad guys get roasted. The flames don't touch the good guys, even though they are nearly at the center of the fumes before they are ignited. Brilliance. When Alpha is kept as nebulous force in the first act of the film, dark, mysterious, a shape of masculinity, it works. Add in the crows and them possibly communicating with him, providing location intelligence, and heralding his presence and arrival. It really works. The Causeway Runcie sequence, while the tide is still in, is a tense and beautifully shot moment in 28 years later, one of the best, second only to Spike sneaking her mother off the island and across the tidal bridge onto the mainland. Another splendid scene in 28 years later is the resolution to the encroaching fat slug ragger in the church as Spike stands watch. The viewer wonders who killed the fat slug ragger as no one else seems to have been present. The reveal of the dispatcher is well handled and adds to Isla's value in the film and to the narrative as a whole. That value shows itself again in the wheatfield scene. The wheatfield scene, starring Isla Jodie Comer, is like a separate moment from a sensible, balanced, well-written and well-acted film. 28 years later becomes that film momentarily with the wheatfield scene, and Boyle obtained a great actress to star in this short film, but it's an isolated capsule like the protagonist's home and disappears as quickly as the tide and Isla's moments of lucidity, leaving Alpha alive twice. The protagonists have two opportunities to kill an alpha ragger on the mainland when it is anesthetized, and they just leave it alive so that it can wake up and keep attacking and killing them. It's nonsensical and breaks the logic of the film. The spine, showing an alpha ragger continuously ripping out the heads and spines of human victims, eventually kills the sensationalism of such a gruesome death. By the third time it happens in 28 years later, it's comical. Human beings have many body parts that can be torn off by an individual with advanced strength, yet this seems not to have occurred to the screenwriter of this film. Pregnancy and evolution questions. The pregnant ragger woman in 28 years later, are the infected having sex now, or was she pregnant before infection? Rage infected only have three desires: attacking the uninfected, biting the uninfected, and eating. In 28 years later, Boyle is suggesting possibly that there is now a fourth desire, Cyotus. And why doesn't the pregnant ragger attack Isla? The handhold moment is good, but there's no explanation for it. It just happens, and then there are no deep, resounding story implications from it. Though an interesting scene, it also breaks the logic of the movie and its world. The woman is supposed to be rage infected and thus is supposed to attack the non infected on sight. The rage woman in this film doesn't do that. She acts normal for a moment for the birth and the umbilical cord being cut, then she conveniently snaps out of it and is a rage monster again. It's imbecilic. As a writer, you can't establish a rule and then break it because you feel like it and then re-establish it with no elucidation. Are the raggers evolving? Say so. Are the raggers learning to control the rage? Indicate that. Does pregnancy grant moments of mental non-rage clarity? Go into that with Dr. Ian Kelson. The writer does not have to be explicit and explain everything to the viewer. The explanations could be subdermal, left to the imagination but graspable. In 28 years later, there are no explanations anywhere, barely anything to intuit, just rule breaking and the inexplicable. The ending. 28 years later has an inappropriate ending with cleanly dressed acrobatic court jesters bouncing off rocks, dispatching the infected as if they were adult-sized dolls, killing any hope of plot redemption, and extinguishing the promise briefly seen during key moments in the film. I don't know what Boyle is thinking, but it is not about maintaining the aesthetic of his film or consistency. It's pure goofiness with a person that has disappeared for the entire film and reappears with no character development, no storyline, and no personality. Wasted character, wasted film. Leave your thoughts on this 28 years later editorial below in the comment section. Readers seeking to support this type of content can visit our Patreon page and become one of Filmbook's patrons. Readers seeking more editorials can visit our editorials page. Filmbook staff members publish articles by email, mobile app, Google News, Apple News, Feedly, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, Pinterest, Reddit, Telegram, Mastodon, Flipboard, Bluesky, and Threads, Rated Articook, X, Flickr, YouTube, Rollo Tomasi, Facebook, X, Flickr, YouTube, Pinterest. Later, Box Office becomes only the third 2025 horror movie to pass huge milestone. 28 years later has passed a major milestone that few 2025 horror movies have. The movie, which was directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland, is the third installment in the post-apocalyptic horror franchise that kicked off with 28 Days Later in 2002. 2025's 28 years later takes place in a Britain that has been ravaged by the rage virus for the better part of 3 decades and follows the adventures of Spike, Alfie Williams, a 12-year-old boy who grew up on the fortified island of Lindisfarne. The cast also includes Jodie Comer, Ralph Fiennes, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Edwin Riding, and Jack O'Connell. Per deadline, as of Saturday morning, 28 years later is projected to close out its fourth weekend at the domestic box office with a 3-day total of $2.7 million. This is set to push its cumulative domestic gross to a total of $65.7 million. In addition to being the 15th 2025 release to pass the 65 million domestic milestone, it is only the third 2025 horror movie to have done so, behind Final Destination Bloodlines 137.8 million and Sinners 278.5 million. The latter of which is the third highest grossing domestic movie of the year at the time of writing. What this means for 28 years later, it still needs to climb a bit more. 28 years later has already broken a variety of records. After earning the best opening weekend of the franchise, it went on to become the highest grossing installment both in domestic theaters, beating 28 Days Later's domestic record of 45.1 million and worldwide. However, it seems unlike to pass either Final Destination, Bloodlines or Sinners by the end of its run. While that may be the case, its domestic total is more double than next highest grossing 2025 horror movie of the year, which is Hot Eyes, 30.4 million domestic. Below, see a breakdown of the 10 highest grossing domestic horror 2025. Ranked title, domestic box office 1, Sinners, $278.5 million, 2, Final Destination Bloodlines, 320 2 years later, $65.7 million, 4, Hot Eyes, $30.4 million, 5, The Woman in the Yard, $22.4 million, 6, M3 Gan 2.0 Horn, $22.7 million, Hot, 9, Bring Her Back, $90.2 million, 10, Clown in a Cornfield, $7.2 million, In spite of the movie's broken records, the reported budget of 28 years later is $60 million in and of itself. While its exact break-even point is unknown, movies often have to earn back 2.5 times their budgets in order to turn a profit in theaters, which could place its estimated break-even point as high as $150 million. The new movie could be set to hit that milestone as it had grossed nearly $130 million worldwide as of Friday. However, it might not clear that total by a very wide margin in theaters, so its success will likely have to be cemented by its VOD performance and streaming revenue. Our take on the 28 years later milestone. The franchise's future depends on the fourth movie. While the 2025 horror movie is performing decently well, the true test of the franchise's box office strength will be the upcoming 28 years later, The Bone Temple, which debuts on January 16, 2026. The two movies are meant to be the start of a year's trilogy, but the third installment has not yet been funded. However, once 28 years later lands on VOD and streaming, it should have built up enough of a viewership base that it puts Bone Temple in a solid position to also turn a tidy profit. Though if the next movie is hit by diminishing returns, it may only accomplish this by a narrow margin. Enjoy Screen Rant's box office coverage. Click below to sign up for my weekly box office newsletter. Make sure to check box office in your preferences and get exclusive analysis, predictions, and more. Sign up. Source deadline 28 years later. Cast Jodie Comer Isla, Aaron Taylor Johnson Jamie. Where to watch? Number 5, 28 years later, 2025. Second trailer is Bloodthirsty and Brutal trailer. It goes without saying that Sony Pictures' 28 years later from Danny Boyle and Alex Garland is one of the most anticipated horror films of 2025. Dormant for 2 decades, the franchise that introduced us to The Infected has generated a lot of buzz and anticipation. While details have been somewhat scant, we are starting to get more details on what is to come from the supposed trilogy of films, which begins with 28 years later. The good news is we don't have much longer to wait as the film inches closer to its release date on June 20, 2025. The even better news is that Sony has shared a new trailer and it promises a much bigger and bolder take on this post-apocalyptic world that still feels germane to what was established prior. We are still skeptical about the claim that it was shot primarily with an iPhone 15 Max, but we are giving them the benefit of the doubt. That said, it looks impressive as hell and we are eager to see it come this summer. Check out the new trailer below and get ready for a new era of The Infected. Synopsis. Academy Award-winning director Danny Boyle and Academy Award-nominated writer Alex Garland reunite for 28 years later. A terrifying new story set in the world created by 28 Days Later. It's been almost 3 decades since the rage virus escaped a biological weapons laboratory, and now, still in a ruthlessly enforced quarantine, some have found ways to exist amidst the infected. One such group of survivors lives on a small island connected to the mainland by a single, heavily defended causeway. When one of the group leaves the island on a mission into the dark heart of the mainland, he discovers secrets, wonders, and horrors that have mutated not only the infected but other survivors as well. Stay up to date with the dark side of pop culture by following Macabre Daily on Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky. Elder millennial horror guy with an unhealthy habit of collecting all flavors of physical media. From Blu-ray records and art prints, oh my, you can find my wallet empty and collections growing. Bloodshine, from filmmakers Emily Bennett and Justin Brooks, is a film about two people who find each other in their purpose. Even if that purpose is through a light-worshipping cult with a kink for hemoglobin and the liquid tissue that surrounds it. It's hard to pass judgment on the appeal of true crime persists as our curiosity grows. In Marrow, from director and co-writer Mitch McLeod, a true crime podcaster gets a lead that could change her career forever, but at what cost? Reviews of short films featured at the 2026 Queer Screams Film Festival. Titles include I Only See You in the Dark, Love Mike, Nightfall, and Ratbone. Vanessa Maki analyzes various extreme horror media, and for this entry, she explores The Seasoning House 2012 and its exploration of objectification and sex trafficking. Got an axe to grind? So do your favorite wizards, warlocks, and backstabbing knights as EC Comics journeys back to ye old days of yore to cast its dark thrall. Check out the exclusive cover reveals for Oni Press and EC Comics Cruel Kingdom 2 Issue 3. Filmmakers Emily Bennett and Justin Brooks unpack the deeper themes of their newest film, Bloodshine, before it hits theaters on Friday, August 21, 2026, from Dark Sky Films. Bury the Devil, directed by Adam O'Brien, Mum, follows an impressive one-take approach and cleverly sets its shocking exorcism story in one location. The film proves to be both a marvelous showcase of horror craft but also for the actor's powerful abilities. Max Doty joined us to dish on the origin of the story for his amazing debut novel, The House That Eats the Dead, his background in screenwriting, which lends itself beautifully to the novel space, things that go bump in the night, and so much more. We play the hits on some of the best haunted house films and novels out there, even turning Max onto one or two along the way. Severin's new box set, Sangster Directs Hammer, doesn't just give us new restorations of Sangster's short tenure as director for Hammer, but also serves as a rich tapestry of information about the British studio, which makes this one of the more insightful releases we've gotten on physical media this year. Let's take a closer look in the crypt. Spanish indie studios Fine Art Games and Digital Dreams have just released the newest trailer for their upcoming psychological horror title, Baptiste, setting the stage for the reality blurring conflict between its protagonist and the titular haunted doll. Number 628 years later review. Danny Boyle revives and radically evolves his hit horror saga in time to confront the next apocalypse. A 12-year-old boy questions the inherited assumptions his secluded community holds about the infected in a thrilling new entry in the 23-year-old horror franchise by Peter de Bruges. Peter de Bruges, chief film critic, latest. Mouse review. A touching bond forms between a North Little Rock teen and her late friend's mom 6 months ago. More than just a restoration, Mysterious Skin gets a full-blown rejuvenation, which allowed Greg Araki to perfect the queer classic 6 months ago. Wuthering Heights review. Intense as her two leads' chemistry may be, Emerald Fennell knows to leave them wanting more 6 months ago. In 28 days later, it took less than 4 weeks to transform London, one of the world's busiest and most advanced cities, into an inhospitable ghost town after an outbreak of the ultra-contagious rage virus struck the human population. Just imagine what another 10,000 or so days might do. That's where boundary-pushing director Danny Boyle and speculative fiction superbrain Alex Garland pick up their 2002 dystopian horror saga, with 28 years later swinging to the opposite end of the UK. To follow an entirely new set of characters, you don't have to be a math whiz to spot that the creative duo are 5 years ahead of schedule. But when Boyle and Garland landed on a compelling enough reason to check back on the now quarantined country, it hardly seems reasonable to wait. And what better catalyst could there be than the real-world disruptions caused by self-imposed isolation, Brexit, and a once-in-a-century global pandemic, COVID-19, related stories? Golden Lion winner Milcho Manchevsky talks, giving a voice to Pulse nightclub survivors with good people. Our job was to stay out of the way. Bela Tar's legacy celebrated at Sarajevo Film Festival, where the original film tapped into society's collective fear of infection. Its decades later follow-up, which undoes any developments implied by 28 weeks later, with an opening chyron that explains the rage virus was driven back from continental Europe, zeroes in on two even more primal anxieties: fear of death and fear of the other. To which you might well ask, aren't all horror movies about surviving an unknown threat of some kind? Yes, but few have assumed the psychic toll taken by such violence or stared death directly in the bloodshot eyes quite so effectively. Though conceived as the start of a new trilogy, 28 years later towers on its own merits. Part 2, subtitled The Bone Temple, is in the can and expected next January, popular on Variety. Apart from its first and last scenes, which introduce a charismatic lad named Jimmy, played by Sinner's villain Jack O'Connell, who learns to defend himself after seeing his local priest and parents killed, the film focuses on a small collective that has taken refuge on Holy Island, just off the coast of northern England. The nearby Scottish mainland is literally crawling with the infected, a new strain of which are blubbery, slow-moving scavengers who eat earthworms off the forest floor. They're disgusting, but little danger to Jamie, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, or his 12-year-old son, Spike Alfie Williams, whom is taken ashore for a father-son foraging mission, the boys' maiden trek beyond the walls. Spike is cocky at first, but freezes up when it comes time to shoot. He's been training with the bow and arrow, but shakes uncontrollably at the prospect of killing an onrushing attacker. Perhaps he wasn't expecting them to look so much like the good people back home, minus the clothes and attention to hygiene. In the most spectacular leg of the pair's surreal excursion, Jamie drags his son across a half-submerged causeway while a cheetah-quick, silverback strong berserker sprints after them. The sequence looks positively hallucinatory, illuminated by night stars and aurora borealis streaks in the sky above. Nothing about the film's look, from unnerving avant-garde inserts of medieval soldiers to infrared flashes of the oft-misunderstood infected, could be described as conventional. That's a logical next step from 28 Days Later, which Boyle shot using low-grade digital cameras. It hurts the eyes to revisit that footage on today's high-def formats, revolutionary as the film was for its time. Here, the radical stylist, responsible for train spotting and trance, updates his technology to cutting-edge iPhones, which maintain a similarly unsettling home video edge without compromising the clarity or the aspect ratio. A dramatic ultra-panoramic frame that's nearly 3 times as wide as it is tall. Such lightweight equipment gives DP Anthony Dodd Mantle enormous flexibility, whether tracking action by hand or squeezing into tight spaces. Editor John Harris adds another edge, unpredictably jumping axes and splicing in non-diegetic elements in strategic defiance of traditional visual logic. Things settle down somewhat after Spike returns home to process what he's just witnessed. In the wild, he spotted a far-off bonfire where a rogue doctor, Ian Kelson Ralph Fiennes, is said to be burning corpses by the hundreds, someone it's hard not to imagine as the iodine-smeared Colonel Kurtz in this heart of darkness, until such time as his own secrets come to light. Something's wrong with Spike's mother, Jodie Comer, who seems disoriented and combative at times. Centuries earlier, she might have been labeled a witch. Now, there's a good chance she could be infected with something, a new strain of rage, perhaps. Finding his courage, Spike convinces his mom to follow him back out into the world, hoping to find a cure or simply some kind of explanation. Doing so means risking death, or worse, exposing either of them to the mutating virus, which has produced intimidating new alphas who swell up and stand tall, striking fresh fear in the audience. Transmitted by blood, rage doesn't kill people outright, but functions like a fast-acting form of rabies, sending the infected into an instant hyper-aggressive frenzy. Fans of 28 Days Later credit Boyle with accelerating the lumbering zombie movie trope. Instead of getting bitten and waiting hours or days to become brain-dead flesh eaters, always the most tedious part of Romero-era zombie classics, Boyle's infected switched over within seconds. Technically speaking, these frightening creatures aren't zombies, and though our heroes, Cillian Murphy and Naomi Harris, both MIA in this movie, didn't hesitate to kill the so-called infected in the original, this sequel restores their humanity. There's still no antidote, mind you, but that doesn't mean these poor, rage-compromised souls don't merit a bit of respect, which Garland generously bestows in the film's contemplative bone temple scene. One doesn't expect a high-tension genre movie to suddenly turn eschatological in the home stretch, but that pivot mirrors the original, which spent its final third at a mansion in Manchester, where soldiers proved a greater threat than the infected, where the Manchester scene showed how quickly moral collapse followed such a pandemic, demonstrating that human nature didn't need rage to unleash its aggressive tendencies. Fiennes scenes provide a more optimistic outlook. As Kelson puts it, the infected and uninfected are more alike than we care to admit. Surviving COVID taught us that, whereas the AIDS crisis was more complicated, since many cast judgment on how the virus was passed. The movie invites such thoughts along with reflection on our own mortality. Typically, we look to adrenaline-fueled entertainment for catharsis. Boyle's thrilling reboot offers enlightenment as well. 28 years later review, Danny Boyle revives and radically evolves his hit horror saga in time to confront the next apocalypse. Reviewed at Sony Screening Room, June 16, 2025. MPA rating R. Running time 1 hour 15 min. Production release of Columbia Pictures presentation of a TSG Entertainment production. Producers Andrew MacDonald, Peter Rice, Bernard Ballou, Danny Boyle, Alex Garland. Executive producer Cillian Murphy. Crew director na Danny Boyle, screenplay Alex Garland, camera Anthony Mantle, fathers with Jodie Comer, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Jack O'Connell, Alfie Williams, Ralph Fiennes, more from Variety. Spider-Man. Brand New Day credits scene explained. Will Tom Holland return in Avengers, Doomsday or Secret Wars? Spider-Man Brand New Day credits scene explained. Will Tom Holland return in Avengers, Doomsday or Secret Wars? Ian McKellen discovered Anthony Mackie is the new Captain America on Avengers. Doomsday set and told him, "You deserve that." Ian McKellen discovered Anthony Mackie is the new Captain America on Avengers. Doomsday set and told him, "You deserve that." Avengers Doomsday trailer. Dr. Doom battles the MCU. X-Men and Avengers face off. Captain America returns. Avengers Doomsday trailer. Dr. Doom battles the MCU. X-Men and Avengers face off. Captain America returns. David Harbour talks learning ASL for DTF St. Louis, shares a line from Avengers, Doomsday, and wants a Christopher Nolan directed Warcraft movie. David Harbour talks learning ASL for DTF St. Louis, shares a line from Avengers, Doomsday, and wants a Christopher Nolan directed Warcraft movie. Tom Holland told Zendaya right away that Robert Downey Jr. is coming back to Marvel after finding out early about Avengers Doomsday. Tom Holland told Zendaya right away that Robert Downey Jr. is coming back to Marvel after finding out early about Avengers Doomsday trailer. Robert Downey Jr.'s Doctor Doom faces off against Mr. Fantastic. X-Men and Avengers with Army of Sentinels. Avengers Doomsday trailer. Robert Downey Jr.'s Doctor Doom faces off against Mr. Fantastic. X-Men and Avengers with Army of Sentinels. More from our brands. Rolling Stone, Casey Musgraves is selling a line of sex lube. Casey Musgraves is selling a line of sex lube. Rob Report, the 1967 Shelby Cobra 427 that starred in the Gumball Rally is up for grabs. The 1967 Shelby Cobra 427 that starred in the Gumball Rally is up for grabs. Sportico Mark Law to sell Timberwolves, links at 4.5 billion valuation. Mark Law to sell Timberwolves, links at 4.5 billion valuation. WWD fire erupts at Macy's Herald Square Holiday Market. Fire erupts at Macy's Herald Square Holiday Market.